Great, thank you. I want to call the Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, March 16, 2015 to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron. Mr. Schron is absent. Ms. Brown.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Has anyone signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Before us, we have the meeting minutes from January 27th. If there are no objections or amendments, I'll entertain a motion to adopt. Motion's been made. Any second?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded by Councilmember Brown. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes January 22nd signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting minutes are approved. Before us, we have two matters referred to committee. If the clerk will please read the first item.
Resolution 2015-0041, a resolution authorizing a contract with Manatron Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $1,016,573 for annual maintenance and support services for the Manatron Visual Property Tax System and Sigma Gamma software system for the period 1/1/2015 through 12/31/2016, authorizing the county executive to execute the contract and other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Great, thank you. And also let the record reflect that Councilmember Schron is in attendance. Kathy, can you just turn the mic on? Thank
Is
you.
that better?
Yes, thank
I
you.
figure you guys can hear me. This is the contract on our real property system. I went forward to TAC with a one-year contract, but they asked me to move it to a two-year because their new real property system will not be in place for 2 years. They are in the process of reviewing the negotiations of those contracts. These Manatron is sole source. Back in 1999, we did do an RFP, and Manatron was the vendor chosen back then, and they're the sole proprietor of this maintenance system.
Great. Any questions from members of the committee? Okay, a question. So in you said 1999 or 2009?
1999.
It was put out, and was Manatron the only applicant responder?
I don't believe they were. I thought we had more, but I have to go back because I wasn't part of that process.
So is the reason that they're considered sole source because we're using their system now?
Yes.
Okay.
And about half of it's funded general fund, the other half is delinquent tax and assessment fund.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Miller?
Could you explain again what you said about the 1 year versus the 2 year contract? You said that kind of fast.
I first went to TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, with a 1 year. They suggested I take it out to a 2 year, see if I can get a better price because the new real property system will not be in place, and we will have to have a contract with this company next year also. And they gave me a 3% increase instead of their normal 6% increase that they were quoting me.
And so when the 2 years is up, are we going to then have a new system? Is it going to be part of the ERP system?
No.
Jeff Mowry, Chief Information Officer. Councilman Miller, it is not part of the ERP system. This is our tax system. So this is the system that brings in all the tax data and distributes it. So it's separate from the ERP package.
So we're going to have a new system for this as well, is that correct?
Yeah, that was the plan.
And at that point, would we bid this contract out again with it no longer being sole source, or would we no longer need this contract because we'd have our own system?
We would no longer need it.
I see. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, and as I understand it, the request is for a second reading suspension
Yes.
for next meeting. Okay. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2015-0041 for referral to council under second reading suspension.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of referring Resolution 2015-0041 to the full council under second reading suspension signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Resolution 2015-0042, A resolution making an award on requisition number 27440 to MCPC Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $579,571.20 for wide area network monitoring services for the period 2/1/2015 through 1/31/2020, authorizing the county executive to execute the contract and all other documents consistent with said award in this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you. Mr. Mallory?
Yeah, Jeff Maury, Chief Information Officer again. This is a contract with a local company here in Cleveland, a company called MCPC. We went out for an RFP in 2013 to look for a vendor, an IT vendor that could help us or continue to monitor our network. So this is a maintenance contract for our primary network. Many of you remember that we own our own fiber network. We have lots of network equipment. We have switches, routers, gear. What this contract does is it monitors the performance of the network, the performance of the switches and the routers that connect all the county agencies. Again, I mentioned we were using a vendor prior, a company called CROS, which was a national vendor. We were paying approximately $400,000 a year for that monitoring service. We searched out for a local vendor through the RFP process, selected MCPC. Based on the yearly cost, it's roughly $115,000, and so it's a much lower monitoring service we're getting with MCPC, lower cost, I should say. The monitoring will still be the same. So it's a considerable savings. It's approximately $284,000 savings per year, and it's through a local company here in downtown Cleveland.
Okay. And this savings over the contract term would be about 1.6 million?
Yes, yes.
Great, thank you.
So they'll perform monitoring as the summary that I presented to you has roughly 400 routers, and then there's some core routers and switch gear that they will perform not only monitoring, but they'll perform upgrades for it as well, and problem solve it if we have issues and fix it for us as well.
And the request is a second reading suspension as well,
Yes.
and the reason for that?
We are currently without support right now. So we dropped support in 2014. So we're flying a little bit naked right now. So we'd like to bring them on as soon as we could.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Brown?
Did we have any issues with the previous carrier other than costs?
No, cost was the primary driver here. And the fact that we too like to have the business here in Cuyahoga. So I'd say those are the two driving pieces. We've used, and some of you may have recognized, we've used MCPC here in the past. They helped us with the administrative move. They helped us with help getting this building set up. So they've had a great performance record for us in the past year as well.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And two other questions. A typical issue that we might see, if you could give me an idea of that. And you also stated that they would problem solve if we do run into issues. Will that be at an additional cost? Is that included in this contract agreement?
Great question. That's included in this agreement. But for example, if we had one of our core routers, if there was let's say, for example, a hardware failure, we had a drive that was to fail or an issue would happen, they would dial into that network or even come on site if required and solve the issue, make any what we call firmware upgrades to the servers themselves or any software upgrades to help in fixing the issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Sharon?
Are these going to be owned properties, the routers and everything like that, or are these leased pieces of equipment?
These are owned. These are owned, and we typically own them just because we extend the life on them, typically, quite some time. So it's usually more cost effective for us to own them because we exceed the life expectancy on them.
And what's the life expectancy on these pieces of equipment?
These typically, I'm going to say on average about 7 years.
Thank you.
I did, in your package, there's a photo, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. The location, just so you know, is in the Plain Dealer building on Superior. That's where this photo was taken. Yeah, it is. It's monitoring service.
Okay, seeing or hearing no other questions, I'll make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2015-0042 to the full council under second reading suspension. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. Did the clerk get the second? Okay, great. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of Resolution 2015-0042 under referral under second reading suspension signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Before us, we have two items under miscellaneous business. The first item, and I'll explain to the committee why it's here. The first item is an item that was presented in the biweekly fiscal agenda, and as my colleagues are aware, I ask every 2 weeks for questions from members of council to be submitted to the administration with the expectation that a response is provided prior to our council meeting. This item, no response was provided in advance of the council meeting, so I asked, as will be standard practice, that if a question is asked, it's not answered in time, that we'll refer to the next available council committee meeting, which is why this item is here today. I have no knowledge of any reason why it should move on, and there was no other reason that it was pulled off the agenda other than the fact that we asked a question and did not receive a response. So I'll turn it over to the gentleman at the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Dever, Interim Director of Public Works for Cuyahoga County, and Stan Kozaleski, our Planning and Finance Administrator. Mr. Chairman, first off, we're sorry that the information didn't make it back in time so it could be voted on by the full council. Stan's with me here to give a little background of what the appropriation request was for.
Thank you. Stan Kozaleski, Planning and Finance. The questions you had asked is why are we requesting this additional monies, and what's the status of the lease? There are some issues during the negotiations of the lease with Greystone and the county in terms of getting that lease.
Let me just interrupt and ask this. So because this is somewhat taken out of context, because there's no explanation here as to that was the same explanation that was provided in the fiscal agenda. Can you just give a brief overview? This has to do with the Haley warehouse.
Yes. I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes, the additional funds are for, they're related to the Haley warehouse. We're requesting an extension of an existing lease at the Southgate Center for the scanning operations of the fiscal department. That function will be moving into the Haley building once that facility is ready to go. And so there was questions asked on the status of the Haley building and why is this being delayed. So basically, in terms of getting the lease signed and executed with Greystone took longer than we had anticipated. Some of the issues that we've been working through with the owners of the Greystone property are dealing with the fire suppression and some of the electrical systems to make sure that we can get the accurate data from their testing so that we can finish out the design work. And we're also looking into the budgeting issues of how much some of those costs will be, what the actual build-out costs of that will be. So those are the reasons why this got delayed in going forward. The lease that we're proposing with the Southgate has an out clause, so once we're ready to move in there, we'll be able to move in there. One of the things that we're trying to do, though, the archives is one, it's a weather-sensitive move, so whenever that facility gets open, we want to move those records in the summertime. So depending on when the bidding goes out for the repairs into the Haley building or the upgrades, we will also then look at the different agencies that have to move in and make sure that any are weather sensitive, that those agencies move in at the appropriate times.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Schron?
So the Southgate facility, been over there, we're going to vacate everything that's over there on the scanning side?
Yes, in the scanning area, yes. We were actually taking a spot of the fiscal area.
That former space that we're in now used to be where the appraisal unit is now in our new county facility here. So when they vacated that area, we had already sold the auto title facility, and we were paying a rental charge back to the new owners of that facility. So since the processing center wasn't prepared, we brought that microfilming operations out to Southgate and set them up out there. And so the intent is, since the processing center is not ready, We're going to have keep this operation going out at Southgate, and as been crafted here is the additional an out clause. So as soon as the processing center is ready, we'll be able to get out of it instead of paying the entire cost of $74,000.
How much notice do we have to give in order to move out?
Unfortunately, I don't have that right in front of me, but it was the intent was we thought 6 months would be enough. So the hope is that the total cost of this is $74,000, so that we would be able to get out at half that cost.
And that's proper notice it doesn't renew it after a certain period of time that we have to kick into a full another annual rent? I mean, that's where you can get caught up.
Understood.
Yeah, you can get caught up if you don't give whatever the prerequisite requirement as far as that notice. And if you go one day over, boom, you're into another year.
Yes.
That'd be a real shame.
I can bring that information back to you as soon as possible. As soon as we get done with this meeting, I'll speak with our real estate attorney in our office, and I'll get that information. I'll have it.
Yeah, because it seems to me that even if it means accelerating the pace and be awkward for a couple weeks, if we can save ourselves a renewal, a guaranteed and automatic renewal, we need to really be watching that calendar really tightly.
Right.
Looks like we have a lifeline.
Sorry.
My understanding, according to John Meyer, who negotiated this contract, it's a 30-day out clause. So
Oh,
we,
that's
yes.
okay. Yeah, 30 days
So-
is, yeah, but sometimes it can be 12 months, and then it really comes back and bite you.
No,
Okay,
it's 30 days for this one.
thank you.
Great. Any other questions? So I have some questions. So the processing center, or, the Hallie warehouse, where are we in not only this function, but when we approved that lease extension, there was discussion of other functions moving into the Hallie warehouse facility. If this item is being delayed because of some various issues, how many other related functions that we're going to move in are going to be delayed?
Well, actually, this afternoon, Mr. Chairman, as you know, I was recently appointed to this interim position. I am being briefed by my staff on the Hallie warehouse and where that is and what's happening with it. So I'll have a better understanding of it this afternoon. So I believe we hope to come forward in the near future and present you an update on what's going on with the project also, much like all the other capital projects we have going on.
Okay, that'd be very helpful for us to know. And just very briefly, what is the delay, the reason for the delay?
What was that?
The delay for the
Yes.
getting the lease signed, getting all the paperwork together. And then also as we're trying to get information regarding the fire suppression system, there was an access issue that they had to resolve with the city of Cleveland in terms of exits for emergencies, which has been resolved. And then working with how the electricity is going to be supplied into the building. I think there's 2 access points. We need to make sure that it has the proper electricity, the proper service for the facility. So those items that we were working out, once we get that information, our designers will be able to go ahead and finalize the design.
But if you don't mind me asking, this was because I'm going to ask anyhow, but that's the good thing about being chair. This is not a new facility to us. Why weren't these items addressed when we entered the original lease, or at least at some point, and especially with this facility, because we were very deliberate in how we approved this ultimate contract. Why weren't these items addressed prior to now?
They had some information, we had some questions about it, and they were going back and verifying some information for us. So it was just clarifying it so our designers can make sure that we have the right, the proper facility there.
So is the issue that since we're now consolidating more operations into the building, that's why we're having the discussion with electrical service? Because as far as I know, the Board of Elections operations isn't changing.
I think it's just how the facility will be, if I understand correctly, and we'll find more, it has 2 ways power gets into the facilities now. We need to make sure whether both of those are adequate. Do we need only one? We need to really look because it had gone through multiple uses in the past. So we want to make sure that everything is laid out appropriately. If we don't need both services, can they upgrade one? There's a lot of design issues that it has the proper power. We want to make sure that it coming into the building is the right way to come in.
Okay. I have one final question. Is this, because this was not contemplated at the time of the budget, am I safe to state that these will be a temporary use, or, I'm sorry, permanent use of reserves? The 79,000, we're extending a contract we did not originally intend to? I would assume permanent, since there's no, if it is a use of reserves, permanent, not temporary. Mr. Interim Treasurer?
We can I tell you what we did to move this, what we were moving this money? Sure. We had this money in our budget, and we went through the budget to figure out where we can move it and not hurt our other services. So that's why we're moving it from that index code to this index code to cover the remaining cost. Now he can speak to temporary.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of council. As far as in my viewpoint, this would be a temporary use. Well, it's a use of reserves. It's not going to be an ongoing. It would not be an ongoing use of reserves. Number one, is simply a realignment because of a matter that should be resolved by this time next year. So it would not be a permanent use of reserves. So I would just characterize it as a use of reserves for this calendar year.
But, right, because you're removing it, fundamentally you found additional resources in another line item you're transferring. So,
Right, within existing resources.
right, so,
That have been contemplated in the budget.
right. So, but because you're moving it between funds in this, or between accounts in this way, it's not technically use of reserves in the sense that we didn't think of it. And there's nowhere else to pull the money from, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions. Okay. This item, we do not need to vote this out. This will just appear on the next council agenda under the biweekly fiscal agenda. We'll just ask the clerk to ensure that that happens. And the last item so thank you.
Thank you.
The last item on the agenda was at the request of Mr. Miller. This is an ID crisis collaborative that for presentation purposes, he would like to discuss this program. Mr. Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I'd like to apologize to my colleagues on the Health and Human Services Committee who are going to hear essentially the same thing for the second time. But there is an urgent need to help low-income people in our community to get identification cards. We take ID for granted, but for very low-income people, getting proper identification can be a monumental task. And identification is needed for accessing programs, for entry to buildings, for getting jobs, just a whole host of things. It's essential. The problems are both financial and procedural. One needs an average of $36.50 to get a birth certificate and a state ID. There are also procedural problems, as seen in the first handout, which is the one with the arrows going back and forth. For example, you need a Social Security card in order to get a state ID, but you need a state ID card to get a Social Security card, so it can be circular and difficult. Fortunately, the consortium called the ID Crisis Collaborative has been helping low-income people get IDs since 1999. The collaborative includes more than 20 organizations, which are listed on page 2 of the second handout. It has been funded over the years by Sisters of St. Joseph, Sisters of Charity, the Cleveland Foundation, the Community West Foundation, the Deaconess Foundation, contributions from member organizations and individual donors. Most recently, it was funded from a Cypre Award, which is a charitable distribution of proceeds from a class action lawsuit in which some of the members of the class cannot be located and there is money left over. But this is, of course, a one-time type of thing. When these funds ran out, the program closed for several months in 2014, but is recently reopened with a $47,000 grant from the Community West Foundation. The second handout covers the questions that we asked for regarding funding of new funding requests. A description of services, a program budget, measurement benchmarks, and staffing levels. The funding request is for $121,959 to take the program through the end of 2015. In a follow-up response, the collaborative estimated that services for 2015 would include helping the following numbers of people obtain documents: state ID, 2,508, driver's license renewal, 210, Cleveland birth certificate, 3,828, and out-of-town birth certificate, 418. So you're talking about helping more than 5,000 people. While the main focus of the program is direct service to help obtain documents, $20,000 of the request would fund a one-half-time advocacy person to help correct procedural impediments. My recommendation is that we fund the $121,959 to keep the program running through 2015, but we may also be able to explore the possibility of partnership with the City of Cleveland and/or the Adams Board. My hope is that beyond 2015, that we would be able to work with the ID Collaborative as part of the budget process to see if we can participate as part of a combination of funding sources in the following years. So this is what the need is, and I just wanted to bring this forward and kind of put it on everybody's radar screen, and it's something that we should discuss and hopefully provide some assistance within the next couple months so that they can keep going. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Any questions? Mr. Sharon?
And how have you been able to identify that there's the inability to come up with whatever the costs are that you're talking about as far as getting your state ID or your any of your birth certificates? What's your source for why somebody cannot come up with that, or why somebody would have the inability to do? Because you take this number and you divide it up, that's a lot of applications, a lot of people that would, when you're getting over 5,000 that you're identifying over here.
There are people's whose income is extremely low, and what little they have, they need it for housing and putting food on the table, and it's just very difficult for people, and so the Crisis Collaborative helps with the cost of obtaining the ID, and also helps them navigate the procedural impediments.
But the IDs that they have in order to access current county services and other funding support don't exist currently in their inventory or wallet or wherever it happen to be? I mean, how are they accessing other services that they're obtaining right now if they don't have identification?
It's very difficult or impossible to access a lot of services without identification. This is why this program responds to a basic need.
So you're saying that none of these 5,000 plus are currently accessing any other services because they would not have an ID?
At the appropriate time, we're going to want to bring in representatives from the collaborative to answer questions like this in detail, but my understanding is that, I mean, you're talking about people who are homeless and have very few resources, and yeah, I wouldn't, I would expect that some out of the 5,000 find ways to access some of the programs, but I think that many of them, that this prevents them from accessing a lot of services.
The concern always is, are we funding the administration of an organization as opposed to the need of the individual? And so that's where I'd love to get a clear accounting of what it is that it's actually being funded here.
Well, actually, very little of the money goes for, I mean, besides the half-time staff person, see, there might be, okay. Hold on a minute. Okay.
It's 28%.
The one half-time bookkeeper is $14,000, and the one-time advocate is $20,000, and the rest of the money goes for services, for paying for identification cards.
Anytime you're running at above the 15% rate, you're starting to get on the expensive admin side. And you're almost looking at, what, twice that? So I just always want to be conscious of where funds go. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Any questions? I just have a question for these individuals that you're talking about are would they classify or qualify for, well, let me ask, let me back up. The city and the state to which you would receive these documents, the city for your birth certificates, the state for a state-issued ID, do they each offer the opportunity for the applicant to qualify for, to not pay a fee under an indigent category?
To my knowledge, no such program exists.
So if somebody went to the state of Ohio to get that's interesting. So you can run for public office and declare indigency and not have to pay the filing fee, but you can't get a state-issued ID? Is that the scenario?
That would seem incongruous, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, this is just for discussion purposes. There's no action for us to be taken here. And
That's correct.
Mr. Miller, I appreciate you following the protocol of preparing the request for additional funds in the format that you did, which is consistent with the legislation that we passed. I hope, and this, I believe, is the first time we've seen something like this, and I hope it proves helpful in us understanding not only the budget, which Mr. Schramm brought attention to, but also the milestones and staffing and so forth, which was the purpose of the legislation. So thank you for following that protocol. Any further questions on this issue?
I'll just comment. It's anecdotal, but I'd say the strong anecdotal comment is that there is a genuine need for this. There are individuals who come out of incarceration, not just simply indigent, and they leave incarceration and they're looking for all of those basic services. And that circle, those arrows, as you point, that catch-22, so to speak, is a real issue. I've heard it from many individuals who sought help. I was not aware of this program, and so I did reach out to our own Office of Reentry. They had to do some phone calls. This is a quality organization. They do good work from the investigation that I've done, and I think it's certainly worthy of consideration and further discussion, the further vetted. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, hearing nothing else. Any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Very good, then we are adjourned.